One of the big questions in Pokemon is it ethical to catch, train, and battle Pokemon? I've seen many takes on this, from bad comparisons to dogfighting to long, detailed examinations of the whole thing. But one thing I've never seen people do is consider why we battle in the first place. Pokemon battling is so ingrained into the culture of the Pokemon world, at least the parts that we get to see through the games, the anime, etc., which admittedly is seen through the eyes of a Pokemon trainer, but Pokemon battling must have cultural roots somewhere. Pokemon battling is like a sport in many ways, even before the very obvious soccer parallels with Pokemon Sword and Shield. And sports don't develop out of the blue. Most sports have deep cultural roots, and that's part of what makes them significant to us. It's something that happens slowly, not like a product where someone might invent it completely new and just try to convince everyone else that they need it. And so I also think that Pokemon battling must have these deep cultural roots. And in fact, I think it might go back several thousand years into the prehistory of the Pokemon world, and have several parallels with how we've domesticated some animals in our world. I'm no expert in domestication or anthropology or evolutionary ecology, so I wanted to get the opinion of someone who might know a little bit more than me.
My name's Gavin. I am currently a master's student at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. I have a dual bachelor's degree in biology and geology, and I'm just finished my first semester of my master's thesis.
Gavin also isn't an expert, but as someone who studies paleontology, he knows a lot more about how species evolve than I do. And Gavin also has his own Pokemon YouTube channel, Pallet University, where he talks about Pokemon and science. So, Gavin, how do we find out how animals were domesticated?
That is an excellent question. To the best of my knowledge, it's sort of from studying communities that are still living like more traditional indigenous lives, such as like the groups of people living in like the Amazon rainforest, because they have, their own domesticated dogs. We kind of have lost a lot of those kinds of records, whereas with some of these communities, they seem to have held on to those types of traditions a little more, and how to go about turning sort of wild animals into not necessarily domesticated animals, but animals more useful than they would be if they were completely wild.
Unfortunately, we don't really have that kind of evidence. We know very little about the ancient history and the prehistory of the Pokemon world, and I think we have no evidence of indigenous communities, so I think we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. Pokemon theory. Let's go over what we know. Pokemon battle each other in the wild. This is depicted in the anime and also mentioned in a few Pokédex entries. We know that includes predator-prey relationships, but we can also assume that it includes competition for mates and just resources in general. From battling wild Pokemon in the games, we know that Pokemon usually have just the 4 most recent moves learned, whether they're good or not. And we also know that wild Pokemon just use a random move. They don't really choose the most effective move or anything. To me, that means that Pokemon are not very good at strategy. They're not very effective battlers. On the other hand, trainers tend to use better moves, and they also improve with experience. So a youngster might not be much better than a wild Pokemon, but you do have ace trainers and veterans that use strategies centered on using a specific item or a particular battle style. Trainers in the Elite Four or champions tend to use effective moves and strategies, not counting obvious AI programming flaws like how you can beat Lance's Dragonite with a freshly caught Zubat because it thinks that Agility, a psychic-type move, is super effective. We are also told that battling is considered a way of getting to know your Pokemon better, of tightening your bonds. The better you can work together, the better you can battle together. And that battling is also a way of getting to know your opponents better by knowing how they battle. So here's how I put it all together. I see it as a similar situation to the early domestication of dogs. Because humans have better battling strategy, Pokemon that are trained by humans also have a better chance of succeeding in their competitions. They'll get food more easily, they'll get better mates, whatever. And so Pokemon that are friendly enough to be trained by a human would have a better chance of surviving and passing on their genes. For the people, they also get some protection. They have the firepower of the Pokemon behind them. And they might also be able to use the Pokemon for other tasks, depending on what kind of Pokemon it is. Like, fire type would be able to provide heat, or a fighting type might be able to carry heavy loads. And of course, they also get companionship and the other usual benefits of having a pet. And so, again, they have better chance of surviving and passing on their genes. Ultimately, you have a mutually beneficial relationship, and you have evolutionary pressure pushing these two groups to work together.
I think that just in general sounds pretty good. I definitely think that, at least at the beginning, before the invention of Pokeballs, that would have to be something that would be much more inclined to work for Pokemon that are not just friendlier, but also smarter. A good example, I think, would be like Rhyhorn. It's very frequently talked about how Rhyhorn is not the most intelligent of Pokemon. So even if it would be friendly enough to let you near it before the invention of the Pokeball, I don't think it would ever really associate that this human is going to help me outcompete other Rhyhorn for resources. And I'm going to preface this with, doing anything based on the anime is just not a good idea. But based on the anime, it seems like Pokemon are more intelligent than the general animal, especially that they're based on. Rhinoceros are very dumb animals. Well, measuring the intelligence of animals is also really difficult because we're basing it on a human perspective and their ability to do human things. But by pretty much any metric anyone that has ever come up with, rhinoceros are not intelligent animals. Even one that has been probably, say, raised by a human would not be able to charge something on command, as a Rhyhorn probably would. So I feel like Pokemon are just inherently more trainable, or maybe they have something like, by this point in our like selective breeding of dogs, they have this sort of pleasure center where part of their brain that activates when they obey a command. That might be something that has just been inherent in Pokemon from the beginning, or something analogous to that.
Right, so that goes well with my theory that Pokemon are all essentially one species. They would have similar evolutionary pressures and also relatively similar physiology and neurology, so like training a Mantine is not so different from training a Graveler. There may still be some differences, but it wouldn't be as pronounced as between training, say, a dog versus training a cat. And of course, there would also be differences of temperament between individuals, especially early on in this evolutionary relationship where not just certain kinds of Pokemon would be more likely to join a human group, but certain individuals would be more likely to do so regardless of species. And we do have evidence of these different temperaments within the games with natures and what's called characteristics, the little short descriptions of personality that are tied to the Pokemon's highest IV. And it's easy to see how this might affect trainability. A Pokemon that is jolly or quirky might be easier to integrate into the human group than one that is naughty or timid. But one that is adamant or bold might be more into training. A Pokemon that loves to eat would be much easier to befriend than one that is quick to flee. But a Pokemon that is proud of its power or hates to lose might be more dedicated to improving its battle skill. In the game, all of these descriptions are tied to the stats, but I think the real relationship might be more the opposite, where the personality is the base, which then gets converted into numbers in the form of IVs and natures for the purposes of the game. Similar to what I talked about with stats in one of the very first PokéStudies. And so the tradition of Pokemon battling would have arisen from this relationship. Humans battling against wild Pokemon as a way to tame and later to catch them could also be construed more as a ritual competition intended to prove the trainer's ability. Sort of like deer clashing antlers to prove which one is the better mate. It doesn't really leave the loser with too much long-term damage. Which could even explain why you can't catch a fainted Pokemon. You haven't really shown control and restraint. A lot of people keep Pokemon only as pets, but humans are naturally competitive, so the better strategists would probably want to see which one is better, want to spar with each other, which would eventually develop into competitive Pokemon, becoming a spectator sport, a league structure, and so on. Eventually, Pokeballs were invented for the benefit of those trainers, and so nowadays that mutually beneficial relationship still exists, but you can also just use a Pokeball to catch and essentially forcefully tame even unfriendly Pokemon. And that could help explain why only advanced trainers carry lots of Pokemon, because it takes a lot of effort to tame and raise something from a wild animal. The one caveat that I want to put here, because I know someone would say it in the comments, is about Pokemon like Alakazam and Metagross that are said to have huge levels of intelligence. But that is something that I believe only comes up in the Pokédex, and we know we can't fully trust that. What we objectively know about their intelligence is just that they take commands just like any other Pokemon. We do have Oranguru, who is able to use the move Instruct, which is, I think, the closest we've ever seen in the game of a Pokemon showing that higher level of intelligence. But even Instruct isn't really strategy. It's just do that again, and I've definitely seen wild Oranguru using Instruct in ways that do not go well for them. So that's how I think Pokemon were domesticated to a degree. Not fully, but also where I think the concept of Pokemon battling came from.
I think it sounds pretty solid.
Thanks, Gavin, and thanks also for chatting with me about this.
Yeah, of course. I love talking about Pokemon pretty much with anybody, but especially when it gets into the science of Pokemon. And, that's pretty much what the whole channel is about, is taking real world science and trying to apply it, even if it's only grasping at some straws, to the Pokemon world with the limited amount of information that they do actually give us.
If that's the kind of thing that interests you as well, make sure to check out Pallet University. And thank you for watching this episode of PokéStudies. If you're new here, I would love it if you decided to subscribe. And I know that I mentioned a lot of my older PokéStudies videos here, so if you haven't seen all of them, I definitely recommend you check out the full playlist. But before you do, leave a comment, let me know what you think. Did I miss anything that could be relevant, whether to the origins of Pokemon battling or to the domestication of Pokemon? I would love to hear from you. I read every comment. Thank you to my lovely patrons, especially luxury patron Ethan Saffron. I'm Umbreon Libris. I'll see you in the next chapter.